This week, the long shadow of Iraq was cast over Westminster. Tony Blair emerged to urge the West to act as ISIS advanced on Baghdad and to say that the crisis was not of his making. Foreign Secretary William Hague announced a thawing of relations with Iran, while the Prime Minister warned that extremism might be imported back into Britain. Elsewhere, away from the crisis, the Prime Minister had problems with his attempts to stop the appointment of federalist Jean-Claude Juncker to the European Commission. Tony Blair appeared on the BBC to say the escalating crisis in Iraq dated back centuries and was caused by bitter sectarian divisions across the whole Middle East. He insisted it was not in any way the result of his decision, along with George Bush, to invade Iraq in 2003, and he said the West needed to act again to combat the extremists. A chorus of voices were raised against him, with London Mayor Boris Johnson suggesting he had gone mad and that the best thing he could do was put a sock in it and a paper bag over his head. Even many of those who had originally backed the war appeared to accept it had been a disaster. Most telling of those was Shadow Foreign Secretary Douglas Alexander, who said the fears of those who had opposed the invasion had been vindicated. It was futile to deny it and would be folly to repeat such an exercise, he said. The Foreign Secretary reacted to the crisis by saying the British embassy in Tehran was to be reopened after a 3-year freeze in relations. Hague issued a statement saying relations with Iran had been improving for some time and the circumstances were now right to restore the embassy, but he failed to mention Iraq. Most believe those circumstances were actually the fact Britain desperately needed to find an ally in the region, and the old idea that my enemy's enemy is my friend was the biggest factor at play here. Critics pointed out that the Tehran regime still supported terrorists in the region and may not be quite as trustworthy as Hague had suggested. The Prime Minister, meanwhile, said the biggest threat now facing the UK was British Muslims going to fight in the Middle East, then returning home to continue the battle here. He held a meeting of his Security Council to consider how to react. The Prime Minister has been determined to block the appointment of the Euro-federalist Juncker as head of the European Commission, but this week he appears to have conceded defeat. Speaking at a press conference, and then reiterating it later in Prime Minister's questions in the Commons, Cameron said he would continue trying to block the appointment right up to the end, and it was good to stand up for what you believed in, which all suggested he knew he'd failed to persuade fellow EU leaders to join his anti-Juncker campaign. The key figure, Germany's Angela Merkel, appeared to have finally lost patience with Cameron's public announcements and decided Juncker would definitely get the job. If that does happen, Cameron will face a hostile reaction from his own MPs, many of whom believe he went too far out on a limb and it has snapped under his weight. And that's it for this week. To keep up to date with all the politics from Westminster, go to ibtimes.co.uk.